Ambassador Dekthara's forearms trembled as she reviewed the intelligence reports scattered across her crystalline desk. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy from dozens of species, all gathered for an emergency session that would determine the fate of the newest applicant race, humanity. The humans had submitted their application for membership 3 cycles ago, and the preliminary assessments had been troubling. Every species in the galaxy had evolved along predictable paths. The peaceful Altarians had transcended violence through meditation and harmony. The logical Vorthak had eliminated conflict through pure reason. Even the warrior-bred Kreks had channeled their aggression into ritualized combat sports that claimed no lives, but humans were different. Terrifyingly different. The data makes no sense, wheezed Counselor Veltar through his breathing apparatus. His slug-like body rippled with anxiety as he gestured toward the holographic displays floating before the assembly. Look at their history. Constant warfare. Millions dead in conflicts that span their entire planet. They've weaponized everything from metal sticks to splitting atoms. Zekthara nodded grimly. The reports painted a picture of a species so violent, so inherently predatory, that many council members had already voted to quarantine their entire solar system. Humans had turned killing into an art form, developing thousands of ways to end life efficiently. Their military tactics were studied with a mixture of fascination and horror by xenobiologists across the galaxy. Yet, interrupted the ancient luminal named Bright Song of Distant Stars, his energy form flickering with confusion, they also show unprecedented cooperation. Their global networks share information instantaneously. They've eliminated several diseases that plagued them for millennia. They've even begun reversing damage to their planet's ecosystem. The contradiction was what had called this emergency session. How could a species be simultaneously the most violent and most cooperative the galaxy had ever encountered? Counselor Heshtak, representing the insectoid Zeph Collective, clicked his mandibles nervously. We've run the psychological profiles through every algorithm we possess. Humans score maximum ratings for both aggressive predatory behavior and altruistic pack bonding. It should be impossible. The chamber fell silent as the massive viewing screen activated, showing real-time feeds from Earth. The humans had no idea they were being observed. They went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their fate was being decided by beings they'd never met. Sekthara watched footage of human cities, marveling at the organized chaos. Millions of these predators lived in close proximity without constant bloodshed. They created art, music, literature that even moved some council species to tears. Yet their entertainment was filled with violence, their sports often bordered on combat, and their competitive nature seemed to infect every aspect of their society. What if we're looking at this wrong? The voice belonged to Counselor Nethra, whose tentacled form writhed thoughtfully. What if their predator instincts evolved beyond simple violence? Before anyone could respond, the chamber's priority communication system activated. A urgent message from the border systems began streaming through the quantum relay network. The mechanical voice of the automated system filled the chamber with words that chilled every being present. Emergency broadcast to all council members. Unknown vessels have breached the outer rim. Estimated fleet size, 10,000 ships. Technology level, significantly advanced beyond current council capabilities. Aggressive postures confirmed. Estimated time to core systems, 72 standard hours. The chamber erupted in panic. Species that had lived in peace for centuries suddenly faced an enemy that could potentially wipe out their entire civilization. The mysterious invaders had appeared without warning, ignoring all attempts at communication while systematically destroying border outposts. Zekthara felt her blood freeze in her veins. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Just as they were debating humanity's membership, a threat appeared that might render the discussion meaningless. In 72 hours, they might all be dead. Council emergency protocols are now in effect, announced the Chamber's AI system. All defense fleets are being mobilized. All member species are requested to contribute resources for collective defense. As species representatives began frantically coordinating their military responses, Zekthara found herself staring at the image of Earth still displayed on the viewing screen. The humans continued their daily routines, completely unaware that an alien invasion force was bearing down on their galactic neighborhood. She wondered if humanity's violent history might actually be exactly what the galaxy needed right now. Every other species had evolved past their aggressive phases, becoming peaceful and logical. But perhaps they'd also lost something essential in the process. Something that only humanity still possessed. The predator instinct that had initially horrified the council might be the very thing that could save them all. As alarms continued to sound throughout the chamber and emergency broadcasts filled the quantum networks, Zekthara made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She activated her personal communication array and began composing a message to Earth, knowing that she was about to violate every first contact protocol in existence, but desperate times called for desperate measures. And if her suspicions about humanity were correct, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. The question wasn't whether humans were too dangerous to join the galactic community. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity might unleash when cornered. Captain Sarah Chun was enjoying her morning coffee in the International Space Station when every communication device aboard simultaneously activated with an emergency signal she'd never heard before. The harmonic frequency seemed to bypass normal audio systems and resonate directly in her skull, creating patterns that somehow conveyed meaning without words. On the surface below, similar signals reached every major government facility, military installation, and scientific research center on Earth. The message was impossible to ignore and even more impossible to explain using conventional technology. Dr. James Okafor was in the middle of a lecture at MIT when his smartphone, laptop, and the classroom smart board all displayed identical symbols that hurt to look at directly. Students throughout the auditorium gasped as the same incomprehensible yet somehow meaningful patterns appeared on every electronic device in the building. Within 6 hours, every major world leader was gathered in an emergency virtual conference that would have been impossible to organize through normal diplomatic channels. The message had somehow identified key individuals across the planet with surgical precision, reaching scientists, military strategists, and political leaders while leaving the general population unaware. President Martina stared at her translator's interpretation of the alien communication, her hands shaking slightly as she read words that should have been impossible. They're saying we're not alone. There's a galactic government, and they're under attack by something that wants to destroy all intelligent life. General Harrison's weathered face was grim as he studied tactical displays that had appeared on screens across the Pentagon. According to this, we have less than 48 hours before this invasion force reaches our solar system. They're asking for our help. The revelation should have caused worldwide panic. First contact with alien life combined with news of an impending invasion should have paralyzed human civilization with fear and confusion. Instead, something remarkable happened within 12 hours. Every major space agency on Earth had begun redirecting their resources toward a unified goal. Military satellites were repurposed for deep space scanning. Research facilities that had been competitors for decades suddenly began sharing classified information. Scientists who had spent years protecting their discoveries from rivals were uploading their research to shared databases accessible to anyone with relevant expertise. Dr. Chun watched from the space station as launch after launch illuminated the night sky. Rockets that had been scheduled for routine supply missions were being hastily retrofitted with experimental sensor packages. Nations that hadn't spoken to each other in months were coordinating launch windows with military precision. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Humanity hadn't panicked in the face of an impossible threat. They had organized in underground bunkers that most civilians never knew existed. Analysts were already dissecting the tactical information provided by the Alien Council. The invasion force used technology that was clearly superior to anything humans had developed. But human military minds began identifying patterns and potential weaknesses with frightening efficiency. Look at these formations. Colonel Jiang pointed to holographic displays showing the enemy fleet structure. They're optimized for overwhelming less advanced civilizations through superior firepower, but they're assuming their targets will fight conventionally. Admiral Rodriguez nodded, her eyes gleaming with the kind of predatory focus that had made her one of the youngest fleet commanders in naval history. They've never faced an enemy that thinks like us. Every species they've conquered probably tried to meet them head-on with their best weapons. The strategy sessions that followed would have impressed any student of military history. Human commanders weren't thinking about how to defeat a superior enemy in direct combat. They were thinking about how to make victory so costly that the invaders would reconsider their assault. Meanwhile, in research facilities across the globe, scientists were reverse engineering alien communication technology with a speed that would have impressed even the advanced species of the Galactic Council. Human adaptability, honed by millions of years of surviving on a planet that constantly tried to kill them, was proving its worth on a cosmic scale. Dr. Oak affirmed himself, leading a team that included former rivals from 6 different countries, all working on modifications to human spacecraft that should have been impossible with current technology. But the alien data had provided insights into physics that human science had only theoretical knowledge of, and human ingenuity was filling in the gaps with terrifying creativity. The most remarkable development was happening in the deep space. Monitoring stations that had been hastily established in the outer solar system, human observers were tracking the approaching invasion fleet, but they weren't just watching passively. They were studying enemy movement patterns, communication frequencies, and tactical responses with the focused intensity of natural predators sizing up their prey. Ambassador Zekthara, monitoring human activity from her cloaked observation vessel, felt a chill run through her crystalline structure as she watched humanity's response unfold. The Council had expected panic, confusion, maybe desperate pleas for help or protection. Instead, they were witnessing a species that seemed to view an impossible threat as simply another problem to solve. Human military networks were analyzing the invasion force with the same methodical precision they'd once used to hunt mammoth across ice-covered continents. Their scientists were adapting alien technology with the same innovative thinking that had taken them from stone tools to space travel in mere millennia, but most unsettling of all was the coordination. Humans were setting aside centuries of conflicts and territorial disputes without a moment's hesitation. Ancient enemies were sharing intelligence. Competing corporations were opening their most classified research projects. Individual humans were making sacrifices for their species with the same instinctive unity that had allowed their ancestors to survive on a hostile world. As the 48-hour deadline approached, Zekthara realized that the Council's greatest concern hadn't been whether humanity was too dangerous to join galactic civilization. Their real fear should have been whether galactic civilization was ready for what humanity might become when they finally reached the stars. The predator instinct that had worried the Council wasn't just about violence. It was about the relentless, adaptive, cooperative pursuit of survival at any cost. And now that ancient instinct was being turned toward a threat that had never faced anything like it. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you cornered the most successful predator species in known history. The Devourers had consumed 17 civilizations before reaching the outer edges of what the local species called the Milky Way galaxy. Their dark ships moved through space like hungry shadows, each vessel designed for one purpose: complete annihilation of intelligent life. Fleet Commander Vexenath had led the conquest of the last 4 systems personally, and each victory had followed the same predictable pattern. The target species would detect their approach with enough time to mount a desperate defense. They would gather their finest warships, their most advanced weapons, their bravest warriors. Then they would meet the Devourer fleet in glorious battle and be systematically destroyed. The intelligent species across the galaxy were frustratingly similar in their responses to extinction. They fought with honor, they died with dignity, and they never once made the conquest difficult or interesting. But as Vexenoth's fleet approached the Council's core systems, something felt different. His sensors detected the expected mobilization of defense fleets from dozens of species, but there was something else. An anomaly that his tactical computers couldn't classify. The unknown element seemed to be coming from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star system that wasn't even an official member of the Council. Initial scans suggested a primitive species that had barely achieved spaceflight, hardly worth the energy needed to destroy them. But something about their electromagnetic signatures was odd. "Commander," his tactical officer chittered nervously, "the preliminary species is exhibiting unusual behavior patterns." Vexenoth's attention sharpened. In 17 conquests, he'd never encountered anything that could be classified as unusual. "Explain." "They appear to be hiding." The concept was so foreign that Vexenoth required several seconds to process it. Every species they'd encountered had met them with proud defiance, desperate courage, or resigned acceptance. None had ever tried to hide. On his tactical display, the human homeworld appeared almost normal. Cities continued to function, communication networks remained active, and there were no signs of the planetary evacuation procedures that most species attempted when facing extinction. But deep space sensors were detecting subtle anomalies throughout their solar system, objects that shouldn't be there. Energy signatures that appeared and disappeared. Movement patterns that suggested coordination but followed no recognizable tactical doctrine. "They're not mobilizing their defense fleet," reported another officer, confusion evident in its translated voice. "In fact, we're detecting minimal military activity on the planetary surface." Vexenoth felt the first stirring of unease he'd experienced in cycles. Were these humans so primitive that they didn't understand the threat approaching them? Or were they planning something that his vast experience couldn't predict? The answer came 18 hours later. When the Devourer fleet reached the edge of the human solar system, the attack began not with the clash of mighty warships, but with something far more subtle and infinitely more terrifying. Human-modified asteroids, invisible to Devourer sensors until they activated, suddenly blazed with jury-rigged propulsion. Systems that sent them on collision courses with the invasion fleet, but these weren't simple kinetic weapons. As Vexenoth's ships moved to destroy the incoming rocks, they discovered that each asteroid had been hollowed out and filled with surprises that violated every conventional understanding of space combat. "Commander!" His tactical officer's voice carried panic for the first time in its military career. "The asteroid impacts are releasing some kind of magnetic powder? It's interfering with our navigation systems." Before Vexenoth could respond, his fleet was engulfed in clouds of metallic particles that clung to their hulls, and created electromagnetic interference patterns that made precise targeting nearly impossible. The humans had weaponized industrial mining techniques. Then came the second wave of attacks, and Vexenoth began to understand that he wasn't fighting a conventional military force. He was fighting an entire species that had transformed their civilian infrastructure into weapons of war. Communication satellites modified to emit disruptive frequencies. Cargo vessels disguised as debris that suddenly activated hidden weapon systems at point-blank range. Even their space junk had been turned into a defensive maze that forced his ships into predictable flight paths. "They're not fighting us," whispered his science officer in horrified realization. "They're hunting us." The revelation struck Vexenoth like a physical blow. Every previous enemy had tried to defeat the Devourer fleet through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. The humans weren't trying to win a battle. They were treating his massive invasion force like prey animals to be stalked, confused, and systematically weakened. His ships found themselves isolated from each other by clouds of metallic chaff and debris fields that hadn't existed hours before. Communication between vessels became sporadic. Navigation systems struggled with interference patterns that seemed to shift and adapt in real time, and in the chaos, small human vessels appeared like ghosts, striking at damaged systems and disappearing before his weapons could target them effectively. They weren't using advanced technology to outfight his ships. They were using cunning, creativity, and an intimate understanding of their own limitations to turn the battlefield itself against him. "Commander, we're receiving communication attempts from the planet's surface," reported his communications officer. They want to negotiate?" Vexanath almost laughed. In the middle of this impossibly complex ambush, the humans wanted to talk. Perhaps they were finally ready to surrender with dignity, like every other species, but when the communication channel opened, the voice that emerged spoke with a confidence that chilled him to his core. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered our system with hostile intent. We are prepared to offer you one opportunity to withdraw peacefully." The audacity was breathtaking. This primitive species was offering him terms? "You are in no position to make demands, human. Your planet will be consumed like all the others." "Actually," the human female replied with what could only be described as predatory amusement, "I think you'll find that we are in an excellent position. You see, you made one critical error when you decided to attack us. And what error is that? You assumed that because we're not as technologically advanced as you, we couldn't be as dangerous as you. But you've never encountered a species that evolved by being the most successful persistence hunters in the history of our planet. We don't need to be stronger than you. We just need to outlast you." As if summoned by her words, Vexanath's sensors detected new activity throughout the solar system. The humans hadn't been hiding in fear. They'd been setting a trap that spanned billions of kilometers, using every resource at their disposal to create a killing field that would make retreat as dangerous as advance. For the first time in his military career, Fleet Commander Vexanath began to consider the possibility that he might not win this battle. Ambassador Zekthara watched the battle unfold from her observation vessel with growing amazement and horror. The Council's most advanced tactical computers had predicted a swift human defeat, followed by systematic planetary bombardment. Instead, they were witnessing something that defied every conventional understanding of space warfare: the Devourer fleet, which had never encountered serious resistance in 17 previous conquests, was being systematically dismantled by a species that technically shouldn't have been able to mount effective resistance. But humans weren't fighting according to any rules the galaxy recognized. "Impossible," whispered Counselor Veltar through the quantum communication link. "Their technology is centuries behind the Devourer standard. How are they achieving these results?" The answer became clear as human tactics continued to unfold. They weren't trying to match alien technology with superior versions of the same weapons. Instead, they were using their limitations as advantages, turning every supposed weakness into a strategic strength. When Devourer ships attempted to regroup in formation, they found themselves navigating through asteroid fields that hadn't existed the day before. Humans had literally moved planets' worth of space debris into strategic positions, creating a three-dimensional maze that forced enemy vessels into predictable patterns. "They're treating space like terrain," observed the luminal entity, Bright Song of Distant Stars. "Most species view space combat as occurring in an empty environment. Humans have transformed their entire solar system into battlefield." Geography. But the true genius of human strategy became apparent when the Devourers attempted their standard tactic of overwhelming force concentration. Every previous enemy had tried to match their fleet strength directly, leading to decisive battles that ended in quick defeat. The humans refused to provide a target worthy of overwhelming force. Their defense consisted of thousands of small vessels, many of them civilian craft hastily converted for military use. When Devourer ships concentrated their fire on human fleet elements, they found themselves attacking converted cargo haulers and mining vessels that had been evacuated of crew and operated remotely. Meanwhile, the actual human combat vessels remained hidden among the debris and interference, striking at isolated enemy ships before disappearing again into the electromagnetic chaos they'd created throughout their solar system. "They're making every shot cost more than the target is worth." Admiral Rodriguez explained during a tactical briefing that the Council was secretly monitoring. "We can't outgun them, so we're going to outspend them. Every missile they fire at a converted garbage scow is a missile they can't fire at Earth. The concept of attrition warfare was familiar to the Council species, but no one had ever seen it applied with such ruthless creativity. Humans were using their industrial capacity not to build better weapons, but to create more targets than their enemies could afford to destroy. But the most unsettling aspect of human strategy wasn't their tactics, it was their psychology. Council observers could monitor communications between human vessels, and what they heard defied every assumption about how species behaved under extinction-level threats. Instead of fear, human communications revealed excitement. Instead of desperation, they demonstrated the kind of focused enthusiasm that suggested they were enjoying the challenge. Conversations between ship crews contained references to historical battles, tactical discussions that treated the invasion as a complex puzzle to solve, and even what could only be described as competitive banter about which units were achieving the most effective results. Bravo Team to Command. We've successfully convinced the enemy that Asteroid Delta 7 is a major weapons platform. They're wasting heavy ordnance on a rock full of radio transmitters and heat generators. Copy that, Bravo Team. Echo Squadron is running a similar deception with the fake base on Luna's far side. These guys really don't like leaving potential threats behind them, do they? The humans were actually having fun. Fleet Commander Vexenoth was experiencing something completely outside his species' emotional range, confusion bordering on panic. His tactical computers were reporting impossible results. Human resistance should have collapsed within hours, but instead seemed to be growing stronger and more coordinated as the battle progressed. Worse, his own fleet was beginning to suffer from something the Devourers had never encountered: logistics problems. The constant attacks by small human vessels weren't destroying his ships outright, but they were forcing him to expend ammunition and energy at unsustainable rates while navigating through an increasingly complex obstacle course. Commander, his supply officer reported with obvious distress, if current expenditure rates continue, we'll be operating at minimal combat effectiveness within 48 hours. These humans are forcing us to use our resources defending against threats that don't actually exist. Vexenoth reviewed the tactical situation and realized that his overwhelming technological advantage was being neutralized by sheer human persistence. They couldn't hurt his ships individually, but they were slowly bleeding his fleet to death through 1,000 small cuts. Even worse, the humans were learning and adapting faster than any species he'd encountered. Tactics that worked against them in the first hour of combat were useless by the second hour, as human forces adjusted their strategies in real time based on observed Devourer responses. They're studying us, his intelligence officer observed with something approaching awe. Every engagement is teaching them more about our capabilities and limitations. They're treating this invasion as a learning experience. The revelation was deeply disturbing. The Devourers had conquered 17 civilizations by exploiting the fact that most species couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter superior technology and tactics. But humans weren't trying to counter Devourer advantages directly. They were creating entirely new categories of problems that Devourer forces had never been designed to handle. When traditional human weapons proved ineffective, they started using modified industrial equipment. When their ships were outclassed, they began fighting with converted civilian vessels that could be replaced faster than they could be destroyed. When conventional tactics failed, they invented new approaches that treated space combat like a combination of hunting expedition and engineering challenge. "Sir," whispered his communications officer, "the human admiral is requesting another conversation." Vexenoth accepted the communication link, though he was no longer certain he wanted to hear what the human had to say. "How are you enjoying your visit to our solar system?" Admiral Rodriguez asked with the same predatory amusement he'd heard before. "I hope you're finding it educational." "Your resistance is impressive but ultimately futile," Vexenoth replied, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "We have conquered species far more advanced than yours." "Oh, I'm sure you have," the human agreed cheerfully. "But I bet you've never conquered a species quite like us. You see, we've been studying your previous conquests, and we noticed something interesting about your tactical approach." Vexenoth felt a chill of premonition. What did you notice? You're really good at destroying things that fight back properly, Admiral Rodriguez explained. But we decided not to fight back properly. We decided to fight back creatively. As if summoned by her words, new alerts began cascading across Vexenoth's tactical displays. The humans had just activated some kind of system that was broadcasting false sensor readings throughout the entire battlefield, making it impossible to distinguish between real threats and decoys. For the first time in his career, Fleet Commander Vexenoth began to wonder if retreat might be the wisest course of action. The Galactic Council emergency session had been ongoing for 72 hours, and Ambassador Zekthara had never seen anything like the data streaming from the human solar system. Species that had lived in peace for millennia were watching a primitive civilization systematically dismantle an invasion force that should have been unstoppable. They're not just winning, reported Counselor. Hashtag. His insectoid voice carrying a mixture of awe and terror. They're doing something far more disturbing. They're enjoying it. The tactical feeds showed human forces that had adapted so completely to the invasion that they'd turned space combat into something resembling an elaborate game. What had begun as desperate defense had evolved into something that could only be described as aggressive entertainment. Human crews were now competing with each other for the most creative ways to confuse and frustrate devourer forces. Mining vessels had been converted into fake battleships that broadcast false energy signatures. Cargo containers were being used as decoy fleets that drew enemy fire away from real targets. Even human entertainment satellites had been repurposed into psychological warfare tools that broadcast confusing signals across multiple frequencies. Look at this communication intercept. Counselor Veltar wheezed, projecting a holographic display of human military chatter. They're actually rating each other's performance and sharing tactical innovations in real time. The intercepted communications painted a picture of a species that had found their natural element. Human forces weren't just coordinating, they were improvising, innovating, and adapting with a speed that defied every model the Council had for how civilizations responded to existential threats. Eco-base to control. We've convinced 3 devourer ships to waste the last hour attacking a holographic projection. How's that for resource management? Outstanding work. Echo Base Tango Squadron just pulled off something even better. They got an entire enemy formation to chase shadows while our real ships hit their supply convoy. Challenge accepted. Tango, Ghost Company is about to demonstrate how to make the bad guys destroy their own infrastructure. Watch and learn. But what truly unsettled the Council observers was the way human strategy continued to evolve during the battle itself. They weren't following a predetermined plan. They were treating the invasion as a complex problem that required creative solutions. And their solutions were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Fleet Commander Vexenoth had stopped trying to understand human tactics and was now focused purely on survival. His invasion force had been reduced to less than 60% of its original strength, not through direct combat losses but through a systematic campaign of resource depletion that had left his remaining ships operating at minimal efficiency. The humans had somehow turned his technological advantages against him. His advanced sensors were being overwhelmed by false signals. His superior firepower was being wasted on targets that didn't exist. His tactical computers were struggling to process battlefield conditions that changed faster than their programming could adapt. Commander, his tactical officer reported with obvious strain, the humans have just activated what appears to be a planet-wide electromagnetic pulse system. All our sensors are now operating at less than 30% effectiveness. Vexenoth studied the tactical display and realized that the humans had done something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They deliberately damaged their own planet's electromagnetic environment to deny him the clear sensor readings that his tactics depended on. No species had ever been willing to harm their own world to gain tactical advantage against an invader. But humans had apparently decided that temporary damage to their technology was an acceptable price for making themselves harder to target. Sir, whispered his communications officer, We're receiving a new transmission from the human admiral. When Admiral Rodriguez's face appeared on the communication screen, Vexenoth was struck by her expression. She didn't look like a military commander facing impossible odds. She looked like a predator that had cornered exactly the prey she'd been hunting. "Commander Vexenoth," she said, with genuine warmth that was somehow more disturbing than any threat could have been. "I wanted to thank you for providing my species with the most interesting military exercise we've ever experienced." "Exercise?" Vexenoth repeated weakly. "Oh yes," Rodriguez continued cheerfully. "We've learned so much about space combat in the past 3 days. Your invasion has been incredibly educational. In fact, we've been so inspired by your tactical innovations that we've started developing some innovations of our own." As if summoned by her words, Vexenoth's sensors detected new movement throughout the human solar system. Objects that had been stationary for days were suddenly accelerating toward his fleet. But these weren't the converted asteroids or modified civilian vessels he'd learned to expect. "You see," Admiral Rodriguez explained conversationally, "we realized that our biggest disadvantage was our lack of experience with space warfare. But thanks to your invasion, we've been getting a very intensive education. And humans have always been quick learners." The approaching objects resolved on Vexenoth's sensors as something that made his core temperature drop several degrees. The humans had somehow constructed new vessels during the battle itself. Ships that incorporated lessons learned from fighting his forces combined with reverse-engineered devour technology salvaged from damaged enemy vessels. "Impossible," he breathed. "You cannot have developed new spacecraft during active combat." "Commander," Rodriguez replied with the patient tone one might use to explain something obvious to a child, "you've been fighting a species that once built continental railway systems while simultaneously fighting a civil war. Multitasking during conflicts is kind of our specialty." The new human vessels were unlike anything in the galaxy's databases. They combined human innovation with alien technology in ways that shouldn't have been possible, creating hybrid designs that violated conventional engineering principles while somehow remaining functional. But more disturbing than their construction was their deployment. The humans weren't using their new ships for direct assault. Instead, they were positioning them in a pattern that would allow them to project force far beyond their solar system. "You've been wondering why we haven't simply retreated," Admiral Rodriguez observed, as if reading his thoughts. "The answer is simple. We wanted to make sure you understand the message we're sending to anyone else who might consider invading our system." Vexenoth felt the last of his confidence crumble as he realized what the humans had accomplished. They hadn't just defended themselves against an impossible threat. They'd used the invasion as an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that should have taken centuries to develop. "The message," Rodriguez continued with that same predatory warmth, "is that humanity doesn't just survive threats. We learn from them, we adapt to them, and we become stronger because of them. Any species that attacks us isn't just starting a war. They're providing us with a very intensive education in how to fight that kind of war." For the first time in his military career, Fleet Commander Vexenoth formally requested permission to retreat from an inferior enemy. But as his surviving ships began their withdrawal from the human solar system, he wondered if the humans would actually let him leave. After all, his fleet represented the most advanced military technology they'd ever encountered. From a human perspective, allowing such valuable educational resources to escape might be considered wasteful. Ambassador Zekthara materialized in the human solar system exactly 24 hours after the Devourer fleet had begun its retreat. The Council had debated for cycles about making formal first contact with humanity, but recent events had made such discussions irrelevant. Any species that could treat galactic-level threats as educational opportunities clearly required immediate diplomatic attention. Her crystalline form shimmered with nervous energy as she approached the modified space station that humans had designated as their diplomatic facility. The structure itself was a perfect example of human pragmatism. They'd simply converted an existing orbital platform rather than building something specifically for alien contact. Admiral Rodriguez met her personally, which Zekthara recognized. as a significant honor even if the human probably didn't realize it. The woman's appearance was unremarkable by council standards, but her presence carried an intensity that made Zekthara's awareness of her own fragility uncomfortably acute. "Ambassador," Rodriguez said warmly, extending her hand in what Zekthara recognized as a human greeting gesture. "Welcome to Sol System. I apologize for the debris we're still cleaning up from our recent visitors." The casual reference to the Devourer invasion as visitors was somehow more unsettling than any threat could have been. Through the station's viewport, Zekthara could see human vessels systematically salvaging technology from destroyed enemy ships, with the efficiency of a species that had clearly done this before. "The Galactic Council wishes to express its gratitude for your assistance with the Devourer threat," Zekthara began carefully. "Your tactical innovations were most impressive." Rodriguez's smile was genuinely pleased. "Thank you. We learned a lot from the experience. In fact, we're hoping to learn even more from our formal integration with the galactic community." The phrasing was diplomatic, but Zekthara caught the underlying assumption. Humans weren't asking to join the galactic community, they were politely informing the council that integration was going to happen. "There are certain protocols," Zekthara explained. "Procedures that must be followed for species seeking council membership. Psychological evaluations, technological assessments, cultural compatibility studies." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed easily. "We're happy to cooperate with any reasonable requirements. Though I should mention that we've already begun implementing some improvements to Council security protocols based on what we observed during the recent crisis." Zekthara's quantum awareness suddenly registered activity throughout the solar system that she hadn't noticed before. Human sensor arrays were operating at frequencies that shouldn't have been possible with their technology. Defense platforms had been established at strategic points that provided coverage far beyond their system's boundaries. Most disturbing of all, human ships were moving through space using propulsion techniques that appeared to be derived from captured Devourer technology. "Improvements?" she asked weakly. "Well, it occurred to us that if one invasion fleet could threaten the entire galactic core, your current defense strategies might need some updating," Rodriguez explained reasonably. "We've developed a few proposals for distributed defense networks, rapid response protocols, and technological sharing agreements that should prevent future incidents." The human was describing a complete reorganization of galactic military doctrine as if she were suggesting minor procedural adjustments. Worse, Zekthara was beginning to realize that humanity's proposals were probably non-negotiable suggestions, backed by capabilities that the Council didn't fully understand. "The Council will need time to consider these proposals," Zekthara said, though she suspected that human implementation timelines wouldn't wait for Council deliberations. "Absolutely," Rodriguez agreed. "Take all the time you need. In the meantime, we'll continue our own preparations for galactic integration. We're particularly interested in establishing cultural exchange programs with species that share our values." Zekthara wondered what values the humans thought they shared with galactic civilization, but she was afraid to ask. The question was answered when Rodriguez activated a holographic display showing human analysis of council member species. "We've identified several civilizations that seem compatible with human approaches to problem solving," Rodriguez explained enthusiastically. "The Krex warrior culture could benefit from our expertise in asymmetric tactics. The Altarian meditation practices might help us develop better stress management techniques for combat situations. And the Vorthic logical frameworks could really enhance our strategic planning algorithms." With growing horror, Zekthara realized that humans had somehow obtained detailed intelligence on every major council species and were already planning how to improve galactic civilization through selective collaboration and cultural modification. "We're also excited about the technological exchange opportunities," Rodriguez continued. "Our engineers are particularly interested in luminal energy manipulation techniques and Zeph collective consciousness networks. We think we can help optimize their applications for large-scale infrastructure projects." The casual reference to classified council technologies that humans shouldn't have known about confirmed Zekthara's worst fears. Humanity hadn't just defended against the Devourer invasion, they'd used the crisis as an opportunity to gather intelligence on the entire galactic community. Of course, we understand that some species might be hesitant about rapid integration. Rodriguez acknowledged with understanding that somehow sounded more like a polite warning. Change can be difficult, especially for civilizations that have become comfortable with traditional approaches. We're prepared to be very patient and supportive during the transition period. Zekthara's quantum awareness was now detecting activity throughout the galaxy that suggested human patience was already manifesting as discrete contact with individual council species. Somehow, without any formal diplomatic recognition, humanity had apparently begun establishing relationships with civilizations that spanned thousands of light years. How? Was all she could manage to ask. Rodriguez's smile was warm and terrifying. Ambassador, we're a species that figured out how to communicate across planetary distances before we developed spaceflight. We learned to coordinate global civilizations before we could leave our own solar system. And we've spent the last 72 hours getting a very intensive education in galactic-scale logistics. The implication was clear. Humanity had treated the Devourer invasion as a learning experience not just in military tactics, but in galactic communication, transportation, and coordination. They'd reverse-engineered not just alien weapons, but alien civilization itself. The Council will need to discuss these developments, Zekthara said, though she was beginning to suspect that Council discussions had become largely irrelevant to human planning. We look forward to hearing from them, Rodriguez replied with genuine enthusiasm. Though I should mention that we've already received preliminary interest from several species in establishing bilateral relationships independent of formal council processes. Apparently, our recent demonstration of defensive capabilities has generated quite a bit of diplomatic attention. As Zekthara prepared to return to the council chambers, she realized that humanity's application for membership had become irrelevant. Whether the council approved or not, humans were clearly planning to integrate themselves into galactic civilization on their own terms. The question wasn't whether humanity was ready to join the galactic community. The question was whether the galactic community was ready to become whatever humanity decided it should be, and based on what she'd witnessed over the past week, Zekthara suspected that resistance would be treated as just another interesting problem for humans to solve creatively. As she activated her vessel's quantum communications array to report back to the Council, she couldn't help but wonder if she should recommend immediate integration or immediate evacuation to another galaxy. Either way, she was certain that galactic civilization was about to become much more interesting than it had been for the past several millennia.